Thank you, ma'am. And the second thing that happens, of course, is that we all sing Rachel. No, we don't sing Rachel. Welcome, Rachel. All right, invite everybody to sing along. I've been to Romamu, I've been to BJ, I've searched all over for a place to pray. I found the mosh pit and knew that this was it. I am a MOSh-nik and I'm here to stay. And I'm turning gray. Everybody! Found community that is in tune with me, singing and dancing in our Zumba God. Some contemplation mixed with elation. I am a MOSh-nik and I'm here to stay. And I'm turning gray. Hey, here Neil Young's joining us next Shabbos. A chance to meet you, a place to greet you, a time to deepen what it means to belong. Let's have some fun tonight and spread some joy and light. I am a MOSh-nik and I'm here to stay. I'm turning gray. Hey, here comes Huff. Huff, I didn't know you knew Neil Young. Okay, that's enough of that foolishness. All righty, welcome everybody. Without further ado, I want to introduce to you Sandy Cohn and Mary Rita and Dan, but you know them already. And Nancy Snyder. Hi, Nancy. Welcome. I haven't seen you in a while. It's terrific that you're here. I was thrilled a couple of months ago, and doesn't time fly, Nancy? It feels like it's just like yesterday that I read your email that went out, I think, to the Washington Board of Rabbis, which inviting us to inquire into inviting you to present on a number of different artists, and so Marc Chagall drew my immediate attention because for reasons in a quote that I will share with you later on after Nancy has presented. And I would like to give you a little bit of background on Nancy, and then she is going to be presenting for about an hour, after which invite your questions. So jot down any questions that you might have. Meira and Carol Ann, welcome. So Nancy Kotz holds a BA in art history and business, as well as a certificate in nonprofit management. First is from Skidmore College, and the second is from Georgetown University. Professionally, Nancy began her career in arts and public policy as part of the Congressional Arts Caucus before transitioning to the museum world, working at the Smithsonian and the National Gallery of Art, where she held positions in museum education and museum retail. Nancy is also the founder and content curator for Visual Arts DC, a social media center, most social media based community with over 1,500 followers focused on the visual arts in the metropolitan Washington, DC region. I'm curious about that too, Nancy. Since 2015, Nancy's been presenting programs in person and in the virtual world to audiences Maryland, DC, Virginia for Jewish Arts Education, JAE. Also serving as JAE Marketing Director, she's expanded JAA through Zoom and clients throughout the US and Canada. Hey, we can say the same thing about us. Clients include senior living communities, houses of worship, community centers, and other organizations which provide programs for lifelong learners. From where you are, without unmuting yourself, let's give it up for Nancy Kotz and welcome her with a good MOSh Amen.
Thank you. And that's the way to clap in ASL as well.
We knew that.
All right, well, thank you very much for that wonderful introduction, Mark. I'm going to go ahead and bring up my slides. Let's see if this magic will work. Okay, and as Mark mentioned, I will be speaking for about 1 hour, and after which I am delighted to take questions and comments from all of you. I am going to do a couple of technical things, though, before we start. I'm going to hide the video panel over on the side of your screen, as well as those floating controls up at the top, so nothing will interfere with the images. So let me go ahead and do that. Okay. Once again, my name is Nancy, and I'm with an organization called Jewish Art Education, and we are a not-for-profit organization whose mission is to bring an awareness of the visual arts of the Jewish world to the wider world. And if my slides will cooperate, oopsie, okay, let me try this again. Let me try the share one more time. There we are. Let's hide the floating controls again. Sorry about that. And the slides do not want to change. Let me see if I can get it to work. I apologize for the technical issue. Ah, there we go. Yay. So tonight's program, as Mark mentioned, is the Art of Marc Chagall, and we are going to focus on Chagall's early career up until just before World War II. Chagall had quite a long and prolific life. He was born on July the 7th of 1887 and lived until 1985. So you can imagine that his catalog of images is quite extensive. And unfortunately, in an hour, we don't have time to go through all of them. But I will note that his art has been described as visual poetry and also as Hebrew jazz in paint, which are two descriptions that I find quite wonderful. He, as I said, was born in July of 1887 to a Hasidic Jewish family in the town of Vitebsk, which is in Belarus. Just by way of further introduction, I want to mention Myrna Tech, who is the founder of Jewish Art Education, formerly of Silver Spring, but she has moved back to her hometown of Virginia Beach in the last year. And it is through her hard work and scholarship that I have all of the information that I'm going to share with you this evening, as well as all of the wonderful images you're going to see. So the first of those images is this one of the Chagall family house. Chagall was born in Vitebsk in the Peskovatiki neighborhood, which was the Jewish quarter of Vitebsk. The area was inhabited primarily by Jews of modest means. The community was Hasidic, and it emphasized emotional expression and that all actions are holy. Chagall often represented his name, which in Russian means he, you, or I walked, as a striding step. And we're going to see that personified in many of the pieces of artwork that we're going to look at tonight. So here are Chagall's parents. His mother is wearing a rich shawl, which she probably received as a wedding gift from her husband. His father is photographed without a hat, and going bareheaded was considered a secular attitude. His parents his father worked as a clerk in a herring factory, and his mother managed the family grocery store. And here is the Chagall family. Mark was the eldest of 9 children, and his mother was only 16 when he was born. This photograph was taken just before he left for his first trip to Paris in 1910. And Mark wrote of his parents, "My father was a timid man by nature, gentle and peace-loving, religious. My mother was a simple woman, illiterate but full of energy. I owe everything to her. The treasure of her talent is alive in me. She loved me, pitied me. She would correct my work, and for me, her opinion had a decisive importance. Chagall, being the eldest of the 9 children, gave Devar Torah, of course, words of Torah, to his parents every Shabbat, and he also took violin and singing lessons. And here is an early self-portrait he created in 1909 titled Self-Portrait with Brushes, and this is an oil on canvas. From 1907 to 1910, Chagall lived in St. Petersburg. As a Jew, he needed a permit to live there. He painted this work when he was 22 years old. And he was due to be called up for military service in 1910, so he decided to move to Paris. There, the aesthetics of Cubism and Orphism influenced him. Chagall based this work on an early 17th century painting. He added an ironic smile, and he wears an extremely confident look. At 22, he sees himself as, quote, the artist. He regards the viewer with skepticism and an air of superiority. This is when he was about to break out of his early environment. It is a psychological self-revelation at the beginning of his career. And here is a photograph of Chagall while he was still in St. Petersburg. He was there without a resident permit and no means to support himself. His father gave him about 27 kopecks, which didn't last him long. And he said, quote, there were days when I collapsed from exhaustion and hunger. He took a job doing retouching work for a photographer and also worked as a sign painter to raise some money. He failed the entrance exam to the Baron Stieglitz School of Arts and Crafts, which would have given him a resident permit as a student. In St. Petersburg, Chagall enrolled in the private Zansteva school, where the painter Leon Basque taught. Basque reportedly paid Chagall's tuition, which was about 30 rubles per month. Basque introduced Chagall to contemporary French art, the Fauves and Matisse. And Chagall said, my fate was sealed. Basque changed my life, and I will always remember him. Color became an abstract entity for the artist. It had no relation to any realistic representation of figures. In 1908, through Yuri Penn, Chagall was put in contact with Ilya Ginsberg, and Ilya referred Chagall to Baron David Ginsberg, a relative. The Baron offered Chagall a monthly allowance of 10 rubles, and he painted his first canvas, The Dead Man, which we'll see in a moment. Chagall sees this as the starting point for his career. Here is another early work he painted, this one from 1910, titled My Father. Chagall wrote his autobiography titled My Life, and it tells of the difficulty with his parents. He wanted them to allow him to become a painter, and he also comments about his attitude from childhood and how he wanted to escape the confines of a provincial Jewish family. So this is an early study for his work called The Dead Man, made in 1908. And this medium is gouache on paper. And for those of you who are unfamiliar with gouache, it's very similar to watercolor. In 1909, Osip Zadkin, a Belarusian-born French artist, stated that Chagall's room was, quote, cluttered with paintings all over the walls and piled up in every corner. The paintings resembled signs for a dressmaker studio, a hair salon, or a tobacconist. But there was nevertheless something primitive and natural about them, something that was astonishing, touching, and made you smile. So take a look at this preliminary study for The Dead Man, and now we'll see the final painting, which looks much darker, but retains many of the same elements, including the figure on the left on the rooftop with his fiddle in hand. It's interesting to note the changes Chagall made from the earlier work. In June of 1908, Chagall was called up for military service, and petitions were submitted for an extension of his deferment. He was granted a 2-year deferment based on having shown brilliant results at school. In 1910, Chagall worked with Leon Bass on set designs for Sergei Diaghilev's Ballet Russe. And now we come to a photograph of Bella Rosenfeld, the love of Chagall's life. She too was from Vitebsk, and this photograph was taken in April of 1911, when she was 17 years old. She was the daughter of a couple who owned several jewelry shops and were considered rich Vitebsk merchants. Her father was not in favor of Bella marrying Chagall, a struggling artist, which lit a fire under the artist, and he spent as much energy and time trying to prove his future father-in-law wrong. He wanted to become a financial success to prove his worth. This is an early painting from 1911-1912 called Nude with Comb. And here we can see Chagall is playing around with various artistic styles, most notably Cubism. In May of 1911, Chagall goes to Paris via Berlin. He moved into a studio at 18 Impasse du Maine, and he often met up with Leon Bass, who continued to support him and had already made the trip to Paris. In 1911, Chagall submitted paintings to the Salon d'Automne, but all of them were rejected. He submitted 3 works to the World of Art Society in St. Petersburg, and only 1 was accepted. This painting is a clear example of analytical cubism. The various parts of a figure are analyzed geometrically. And we can contrast that with this 1911 work titled Nude in the Garden. This is much more lyrical and poetic. The fact that they were both done around the same time is quite revealing. It shows that Chagall had many aspects to his personality. Like a good student, he was exploring various approaches. The flattening of forms and repetition of curves are aspects of modernism. And this was also painted in 1911. This is The Poet with Birds, another example of Chagall's emotional and romantic side. You'll notice that there is a repetition of parallel lines that contrast with the pattern of the bird footprints. Chagall's imagination must have been stimulated by dreams. And this is another work from 1911. It's perhaps one of his better known works, as it is a part of the collection at the Museum of Modern Art. His friend Blaise Cendrars named the work Eye in the Village. The life of peasants came from the cycle of the seasons. The painting encapsulates the idealized view of the world. His clear red background recalls the tradition of large icons. And I should note that the town of Vitebsk not only had a very vibrant Jewish population, but also a very well-established Russian Orthodox population. And if you look in the back center of the painting, just above the orange building with the dome, you might notice a cross on the top of that building in the back. That is a representation of one of the Russian Orthodox churches he knew from his childhood. Here, the painting encapsulates that idealized view of the world. And the disc was a strong element in the composition. The painting is both human and universal with many contrasts, and it is a synthetic reality. I'd also like to note the line between the animal's eye and the person's eye. They are equals. And we also see in between them at the bottom in sort of a rectangular shape, the representation of the tree of life. Here is a photograph of Chagall in Paris in June of 1911. Notice that he is dressed in a suit, vest, shirt, and tie, and he wears a jaunty hat to complete his distinctive persona. And here he is in his studio. This is an anonymous photograph from 1911. He rented a studio and sublet one of the rooms to help pay the rent. After a year, he moved to a cheaper location near a slaughterhouse. And the next year, he exhibited in Berlin at an international show, from which he gained much prominence. His paintings then appeared in Paris and other European capitals. His meteoric rise to fame affixed him in the annals of modern art. He worked out his own response to Cubism and other styles. And among his good friends were Robert and Sonia Turc-Delaunay, and she, of course, was so well known for her designs that translated into haute couture and fabrics. In 1914, he applied to the Russian consulate for a 3-month permit, as he wanted to visit Russia after the opening of his Berlin exhibition, to attend his sister's wedding and to see Bella once again. And this work may have been influenced by those events. This is the canopy from 1912. That winter, he moved into a studio at 2 Passage de Danzig. This was part of the La Ruche complex, where many artists lived, including Modigliani, Archipenko, Soutine, and Schertenberg. Chagall socialized with poets like Sandrars, Max Jacob, Salomon, and Apollinaire. And he sent 3 works to the Salon d'Automne. An entire wall in the Cubist room was devoted to his work. And the first serious critique of his work was also written at the time and appeared in a publication called the Paris Nouvelle. There was another serious critique in a publication called Friend, and that was a Yiddish newspaper in St. Petersburg. Chagall was smitten by Bella, and he had left his fiancée in Vitebsk. His thoughts turned to marriage and the establishing of his own family. And another work from 1911 is The Birth. This painting was done shortly after he got to Paris, and it reflects a modernist sensibility. There is a contrast from the naturalistic documentary approach that was taken in earlier works. The cemetery was also painted in 1911. It shows the crowded placement of upright gravestones, which was frequent in Eastern Europe. It is an indication of the limited space provided for Jewish burials. Ochels, or small buildings, were built for special rabbis, and the shapes in the sky repeat those of the cemetery site. And now we come to The Fiddler, which was done between 1912 and 1913. The Fiddler with 1 foot on the roof recalls Fiddler on the Roof. His sad song recalls the groans and lamentations of the soul. Past youth, dead love, and lost liberty are also remembered. The house and church tower suggest memories of Russia. The green face of the figure is seen as inebriation through a slang expression. It is painted on a white tablecloth that had a checkered pattern. And if you look closely, you can still make out some of that checkered pattern just above the fiddler's shoulder to the left. The grid prevents the viewer from seeing a traditional perspective. A small person with 3 heads that is seen to the left and in the lower portion of the painting might suggest and symbolize the Russian 1905 uprisings. The fiddler functions on many levels. This also may refer to the precarious nature of life, and Chagall often portrays musicians, acrobats, and other performers who came to Vitebsk and to the Jewish quarter there to perform on holidays and festival days. The Cemetery Gates was painted in 1917. 2 verses from Ezekiel are written over the gateway. These are the gates to the Jewish cemetery. The references to Ezekiel are to Ezekiel's opening graves and restoring the people and bringing them to the land of Israel. He will put his spirit into them and they shall live. The words on the gateposts are illegible, and this painting is a memorial to all who died in the Pale of Settlement. Of course, those were the 16 provinces of Russia where the Jewish population was restricted before the 1917 revolutions. Chagall focuses on the gates and the picket fence that lead into the cemetery. The fragmented sky repeats the angles of the gates and its pediment. This work was painted a little earlier than the previous one. This one was painted in 1912 and is titled The Pinch of Snuff. There are 3 artworks by Chagall on this subject, and this one was shown in Berlin in June of 1914. The main difference is the letters in the Star of David. The letters in this oil version signify death. The writing on the pages in the book is in Yiddish, and they may refer to the saying, "It's not worth a pinch of snuff." This points towards the series of Jews that he painted from life, and that was after Chagall returned to Vitebsk from Paris. This is one of my favorite Chagall paintings in this program, and we use it in several of our programs. It is called Self-Portrait with 7 Fingers and was painted in 1912 while Chagall was still in Paris. The portrait is done in a Cubist folk art style, and there is no visually identifiable Jewish connection. Rather, he hides that Jewish connection. On the left, through the window, we see the La Tour Eiffel and the streets of Paris. But on the right, Chagall dreams of Vitebsk and the churches that are there. He labels the landscape in Yiddish, and the Yiddish provides a clue to the meaning of his 7 figures. The number 7 has powerful apotropic Jewish meaning. Intensity, passion, and commitment characterize effort by 7 parts of the body. And Chagall wanted to be a painter 100%. It's also worth noting that he is dressed in a manner that you would not expect of someone who is engaged in the act of creating a work of art. He is wearing a tuxedo jacket and bow tie, as well as a boutonniere. So he is dressing for success, one might say. And this self-portrait from 1912 is done in a very different style. This one is one of the series of self-portraits that he made. And his confident approach is like the self-portrait with brushes that we saw earlier. His earlier paintings were at the Der Sturm Gallery in Berlin and Paris, and the colors are subdued and similar to 17th century painting. The seriousness in the heroic tradition of Western art, we see the tip of a white flower that indicates a plant that it might probably be a lily. In 1929, this work and another self-portrait were in a magazine, and the issue was devoted entirely to Chagall's work. The Praying Jew, Rabbi of Vitebsk, was painted in 1914. This is probably the earliest painting of a Jew in Chagall's oeuvre, and it was done from life. Chagall marries realism and abstraction in the work. Black and white are the colors of an Orthodox Jew at prayer. The black stripes of the tallis are structural elements. Chagall repeated this composition multiple times, and this particular version is in a collection at the Philadelphia Museum of Art. There is also one in Chicago and another in Switzerland. Jew in Bright Red was also painted in 1914. And he's actually dressed in a black jacket, but the accents of the painting are all in red, including his full beard and mustache and hair. The house and rooftops behind him emphasize the vibrant color. Notice the triangles in the window and the green glove. They are probably the impact of Cubism, which Chagall learned while he was in Paris. Chagall placed Hebrew writing as a circular surrounding shape in the work of art in the background. The technique of using a script like that or numerals is known as micography, And it was an artistic technique that was pioneered among Jewish artists. So this photograph is of Marc and Bella during World War I. In 1914, he returned to Russia for what was intended to be a 3-month visit. But the outbreak of World War I prolonged his stay there, and he took the opportunity to get married to Bella. And this work is titled Purim and was painted between 1916 and 1918. It's part of the collection at the Philadelphia Museum, actually. The painting was commissioned for a mural in a synagogue school, and the details are didactic. They convey the Book of Esther and Bella's memories. On the blue banner-like form is a horseman in the back left. Is he a Purim gift or a mounted courier? Couriers, of course, delivered King Ahasuerus' writ. It gave Jews permission to defend themselves. And we wonder if the figures on the poles on the upper left might be the sons of Haman, who were hung. These murals were painted on the eve of the Bolshevik Revolution, and Chagall recounts how he narrowly escaped a pogrom in Petrograd, and he tells of these experiences in his autobiography, My Life. The Feast of the Tabernacles, Sukkot, was painted in 1916. The theme comes from a 1917 commission that Chagall received to do murals for a school at the Petrograd Synagogue. Bella beautifully described the harvest Thanksgiving. A lean-to was built behind the house, and a cart loaded with pine branches drove into the yard. The walls were pine, but the roof was open to the sky, and her brothers climbed up the ladders and stood on chairs, passing the branches to one another and piling them so that no star could shine through. A long table with benches was placed in the middle, and the floor was bare earth. Her father and brothers ate a ceremonial meal inside, but women were not allowed to join them. We do see one woman on the right-hand side passing a plate of food in through the window, and I love all of the little details that Chagall includes, like the little boy on the right who's trying to play with that chicken, and the little animal that's in the doorway next to the woman as she hands the food inside to the sukkah. You'll also notice that in the background on the left, we see one of those Russian Orthodox churches. Here we have Rabbi with Etrog from 1914. The small figure on the top of the rabbi's head is open to interpretation. Some say it is his soul from which he has separated and turned away. This work is titled The Birthday and was painted in 1915 and is part of the collection at the Museum of Modern Art in New York. The diagonals on the left balance the additions on the right. Chagall captures the anticipation and vision of his love, Bella. Her staring eyes gaze through the window. In September of 1915, Chagall and Bella moved to St. Petersburg. And this is from 1918 and is titled The Wedding. Chagall was a man of passion. He was a man of fierce loves. Foremost was his love for art. It unlocked a world wider than the one into which he was born. He married his fiancée Bella Rosenfeld in 1915. And Marc and Bella are the subject of this painting, which affirms a love for his culture. And we notice once again the motif of the fiddler in the tree on the right. And inside the house, we see a table set for a family. In 1917, 1917 was a momentous year in Russia. The October Bolshevik victory followed the February Revolution, and this was commemorated a year later in Vitebsk. Chagall was made the Commissar for Art and organized a grand celebration. Casimir Malevich arrived at the school shortly and taught total abstraction. A theater commission allowed the Chagall family to leave for Moscow, and in 1922, Chagall left the Soviet Union for Berlin. Bella and their daughter Ida would later join him there, And at this time, he learned printmaking technique and learned how to make etchings. So here is the happy little family. We see Marc Chagall with Bella and Ida in St. Petersburg in 1917. This photograph looks like a happy little family, but Chagall was about to be fired from his post. He was relentless and undeterred in his quest to become an artist. In 1918, he gave lessons to his first Vitebsk students in his apartment. His brother David also died in the Crimea. Chagall may have gone to Crimea to find him. Chagall renews his friendship with Yuri Penn, fellow student, and they paint portraits of each other. And here we see Bella posing for a painting called Bella with White Collar, from 1917. Chagall and the family spent the summer of 1917 in Vitebsk, as well as Adacha outside of the city. And here is that finished work, Bella with the White Collar, painted in 1917. The painting may have been inspired from their Dhaka vacation in that year. We can see the artist at the bottom guiding the first footsteps of their small daughter. The effect of the composition is monumental. Chagall used a limited palette, and the painting is a magical one. This work is called Painter to the Moon and was also made in 1917. The artist occupies an absurd position, yet he fills the pictorial space in a dramatic way. The unusual shape seems to be intentional. The tiny village scene at the bottom resembles a fan. The painting is similar to works he did for the theater in 1919. From 1918 to 1920, he directed the Vitebsk Academy. After the revolution, Chagall became art commissar of Vitebsk. And all felt compelled to respond to the revolution's changes. 2.5 years later, he was removed from his post. His fellow artists said he was not revolutionary enough in his art. From 1920 to 22, he made stage and costume designs, and in 1923, he moved to Paris. During World War II, he was fortunate enough to come to the United States. In the literary magazine Der Strom, Chagall wrote, "If I were not a Jew, according to the meaning which I put into this word, then I would not be an artist, or I would be quite a different one." And this work is called The Traveler and was also painted in 1917. World War I kept Chagall in Russia after his visit to Paris. He participated in the cultural revival movement in St. Petersburg and illustrated stories by Yiddish writer Peretz and de Meester. He planned murals for the Jewish secondary school and was involved in the Russian theater creating sets. This work with the man with the yellow face and green hand recalls Chagall's instructions to the cast members of that play, for which he had made this stage piece. He had the cast members color their faces and hands, and this was intended to heighten the fantastic atmosphere of the play. Chagall used the same figure in at least 2 other settings. First, he was a trapped bridegroom joyously bolting for freedom. In another case, he was a symbol of Soviet revolutionary optimism. And this photograph was taken of the artist in 1918 in St. Petersburg. In January of that year, the People's School of Art was inaugurated. In April, Chagall became the director of the art school, and he also ran a free painting studio. Other artists also offered free painting studios, including El Lissitzky and Yehuda Penn. Chagall tried to resign as art commissar, but his resignation was refused. And here we see him at his easel. This was taken in November of 1920. The photograph shows Chagall at work on a sketch for a mural for the State Jewish Khmerny Theater in Moscow, which he did between 1920 and 1921. And this photograph shows Chagall teaching at a Jewish camp for war orphans. Throughout the entire year, Chagall taught at this camp, which was about 18 miles from Moscow. And these 11 students all appear to be paying very close attention to the great work, to the great artist. Jewish Theater Music is the title of this 1920 work. The violinist has a green face, and we might wonder if he is nauseous or green with envy, and why he is seated on top of houses, and who is the human flying in the sky? Why is there a ladder leaning on the tree? And what kind of animal is climbing onto the rooftop? Chagall provides many images for questions, but very few answers. And now we see a photograph of Bella posing for a work titled Double Portrait. And this photograph was taken in 1925. And we can see Ida is standing behind her father, and we can see the birthday hanging on the wall behind them. And this is another photograph of Chagall and his family in his studio in the 1920s. Chagall's work combined cubism and folk art. His biblical stories appear as sharply observed contemporary life. This is thought to be a natural legacy of his Jewish upbringing. That is, Judaism maintains a sense of continuity. The photograph shows Mark, Bella, and Ida in his Paris studio, and we can see several of his well-known works, including The Praying Jew, I and the Village, and The Birthday. And of course, I've already mentioned that he worked on his autobiography. I will back up just to say for a moment that in 1922 to 23, the artist was in Berlin working on learning printmaking techniques, learning how to make etchings and lithographs. He studied with the Jewish printmaker Hermann Struck, and the far-sighted Ambrose Vollard especially sustained Chagall. So in 1922, he completed his memoir, My Life. The book has about 50 illustrations by the artist. The full text of the work with engravings came out with Bella's French translation in 1931, and he read his work to private circles in Moscow. Chagall left for Russia for good early that summer. His family remained in Moscow, but joined him several months later. He initially went to Kotz, Lithuania, and that was at the invitation of the Lithuanian ambassador. When he leaves Kotz, he takes his entire body of work with him and goes to Berlin. He searches for canvases left at the De Sturm gallery there, but they had all been sold without the artist's knowledge. And they were left, these had been left there before the war. A lengthy lawsuit was required to get them back. And here we see Chagall with Bella and Ida in Berlin in 1923. He was quite well known in Berlin, and the paintings he left in Germany before World War I helped make his reputation. The magazine Der Strom regularly published reproductions of his work and printed more than 25 of them between 1917 and 1922. They even devoted a special issue to the artist. The local artistic community was also interested in Chagall's work, and he devoted himself to producing engravings for his autobiography. In September of 1923, he settled in Paris. And this wonderful, colorful work is called Clown Carrying Horse and was painted in 1924. The defining traits of Chagall's art are the introspective rendering of the public world, a kaleidoscope of color, the balance of heterogeneous elements. In 1920-21, he made a huge mural for the new Jewish theater in Moscow and used clowns and acrobats along with farmyard animals, reflecting traditional Hasidic tumbling in impromptu performances, which took place in Jewish homes on major festivals in Vitebsk. Chagall described himself as a, quote, tempestuous, restless temperament, unbalanced with a well-known dose of chaos. And this work, The Hen with the Golden Egg, is from 1927. It is a gouache and pencil on paper. It is taken from a fable that supplies delight in 3 different ages. The child rejoices in the freshness and vividness of the story. The literature student is eager to study the consummate art, and the experienced man delights in the subtlety of character and life. So you all may remember this fable. A cottager and his wife had a hen that laid a golden egg every day. They supposed that the hen must contain a great lump of gold inside, and in order to get the gold, they killed the hen. Having done so, they found to their surprise that the hen differed in no respect from their other hens. The foolish pair, thus hoping to become rich all at once, deprived themselves of the gain of which they were assured day by day. The story has a goose in other versions. Fontaine's version includes a commentary warning against greed. That is, as opposed to a pithy moral. And he wrote, "Greed loses all by striving all to gain." The story is for those who become poor by trying to outreach themselves. This photograph is of the Chagall's villa in Montmorency at 15 Rue de Sycamore in Paris, and was taken in 1929. Chagall bought this house, and the Gallery Epoque in Brussels exhibited a series of Chagall's gouaches. In 1929, Hermann Struck invited Chagall to visit him in Haifa. And in 1929, of course, the stock market crash occurred, and his dealer had to break his contract with Chagall. And our final image this evening is called The Stroll and was painted in 1929. Like many of Chagall's paintings, we are dumbstruck by many questions, and Chagall does not give us easy answers. So as we like to end all of our programs, it is said that the love of art cannot be taught, it can only be caught. And I hope we've made the Art of Marc Chagall contagious to all of you this evening. We have quite a catalog of programs from Jewish art education, and you can see some of the little vignettes on this slide, along with our website address and our social media addresses. We are on Facebook, Instagram, and we're still on Twitter. Our programs range from ones on individual artists, like the one we did tonight on Chagall. You can also see on the opposite corner on the top row an image from Roy Lichtenstein, as well as a portrait of Camille Pizarro on the bottom row. We also have programs on thematic subjects. The little building you see next to the Chagall Eye in the Village is work from a program we have called Lost Synagogues, which highlights watercolor images made by a New York artist by the name of Andrea Strongwater. And she recreates these lost synagogues that were destroyed in Eastern Europe from old photographs, postcards, etc. And next to that on the top row, you see a carpet page for a Bible that says Bereshit. That is one of the images from our Jewish Artists and Genesis program. On the bottom row, starting on the left, the horse is from a series of a two-part series called Gilded Lions and Jeweled Horses, which explores the art of Eastern European Jewish craftsmen who decorated synagogues and made paper cuts, beautiful works of cut paper that are hand-colored. But when they came to the United States, they translated their artistic skills into the carousel animal trade. And next to that, going towards the center, the black and white image is a representative of one of our holiday programs. In the case of the one we're looking at right now, that is the blowing of the shofar from our High Holidays program. And finally, in the lower right-hand corner is one of my favorite images, the egg with the safety pin holding it together. And that photograph was taken by Aliza Olmert, wife of the former Prime Minister of Israel. She is an accomplished photographer, and that is from our Art of Tikkun Olam program. She said she was cracking eggs one day and thought about trying to stitch an egg back together as a process of healing the world. So thank you all very much for joining me tonight. I'm going to bring everybody back up on the screen. And I'm going to stop my share. And I am more than happy to take any questions or comments you all have. And I want to tell Jay I love his background.
First of all, thank you. Thank you so much, Nancy.
You're welcome.
I recall seeing the this is not about Chagall, but about your last panel, seeing those gilded horses at the American Folk Art Museum many years ago. And it was tremendously exciting. Also, that these horses and these figures had been in synagogues or in much smaller miniature versions. So that's maybe we'll bring you back to do something on that.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, that's a wonderful two-part series we have that's based on that exhibition that was held at the Folk Art Museum.
Beautiful. How about I go around and invite people to ask questions and you'll answer them? How's that sound?
Sounds perfect.
Go ahead, Deborah.
I see Deborah has her hand up.
Yeah, I just called on her.
Oh, okay. Yeah, this was really interesting. I was really taken by that one painting where the background had the circle behind it with all the Hebrew writing. And I was looking at it, first of all, how hard it is to do all that. It's very intricate. But I'm wondering if you know what the text was. Is it real document or is it just made up, or do you know?
I think it was just letters used as decoration.
Wow.
I don't think that it was a particular passage or anything like that.
Okay, thank you.
The technique of micography is really interesting. The use of letters, symbols, or numbers to form an image or to enhance an image. And many times the micrographic text does not have any particular meaning. There's one image that we show in quite a few of our programs, a German illuminated manuscript page from the book of Jonah, which shows Jonah coming out of the fish. And the entire outline of the fish, including the scales on his tail, as well as Jonah's garment and his outline, are all in tiny little Hebrew letters, but they don't say anything. There is text from the book of Jonah on the side of the work, but the micrographic detail does not say anything in particular. Micrography is also used as a decorative element to form other kinds of patterns and images. And you often see that used in carpet pages and illuminated manuscripts.
Thank you.
I saw another hand up. Is that it says Hoff the artist.
And
yes, Nancy, maybe you could say another word about the inspiration of Fiddler on the Roof for Fiddler on the Roof.
Right. So, of course, the play was based on Shalom Aleichem's works, and I think that the folks who adapted Shalom Aleichem for the play had also seen Chagall's images, and sort of came up with the idea of the precarious nature of a fiddler on top of the roof. And as you might recall, when Chagall was a young boy, he did take violin lessons, as many young boys of that period did, who were able to afford a musical instrument. So I think that the idea of including musicians in his work started early on. He was also exposed to all of these performers that would come through Vitebsk on festival days to provide entertainment for the citizens. And he was always enthralled with the musicians, the acrobats, the animals, and all of that.
Thank you. Rachel, you had your hand up before, didn't you? I'll unmute you.
Yay.
Oh,
Oh, sorry, go ahead.
when I, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. When I saw the painting with the 7 fingers,
Mhm.
so and it is a good luck. Number 7 is a good luck. So it reminds me that every single time my grandmother or mother cut something or cut like a cucumber or
Mhm.
tomato or an egg, it's always 7 pieces.
Oh, interesting.
And I do exactly the same. I will never cut 6 or 8. It's always 7.
Always 7. That's
So-
very interesting. Chagall loved the number 7 because he, of course, was born on the 7th month, on the 7th day in 1887. There are also 7 branches on a synagogue menorah.
Right.
So the number 7 really resonated with him. And anything done with 7 body parts is considered a worthwhile endeavor. So I love that you have that tradition in your home as well. Next time I cut a cucumber, I'm going to count how many slices I make.
7. Right.
Rachel, that's fantastic. I do want to add a little bit about the number 7, which is knowing that Chagall came from a religious Hasidic family.
Right.
Mhm.
Number 7, of course, is the number of for completion, and is also corresponding to the 7 lower sfirot, which are the sfirot of the world in which we live in, that we have access to in this plane of existence. And so I wouldn't discount, the number 7 also, being, resonating from his childhood.
Absolutely.
But I love the cucumber. I won't forget about it.
And also when you say Shavua, it's Sheva. It's 7 days.
There
So-
you go.
Yeah,
There
it's
you go. And of course, the 7 days of the week.
right. That's it. That's a Shavua. In Hebrew, Shavua is 1 week.
Right. And
Yeah.
I would throw in the 7 dwarves also.
Predating Chagall by a little bit. Jay, go ahead.
Yeah, well, I noticed this first, the 7 was only on the one hand.
Yes,
It wasn't on his right hand. It's
that's correct.
just on in the artistic hand, I guess that was.
Uh-huh.
But I was noticing, I had a couple of things. One was it wedding or marriage in 1917? On Bella's cheek was a small, very basic drawing of a person. And
Yes, uh-huh.
I mean, I know he doesn't explain a lot, but any thoughts as to what that might be?
I don't know. I'd have to look at it again more closely. Thank you for pointing that out. It's something that I didn't notice, but I'll go back and look. There is so much going on in so many of his paintings. I will see what I can find out about that.
Yeah, there's not a lot of color. I mean, was it the angel above in red, but that was
Right,
pretty much,
right.
just two, black and white or in grays and
Absolutely,
things like that.
absolutely.
And I guess the second question I have, is there a part 2 to this? His
Well,
later years?
We don't have a part 2 of this program, so to speak. But I am in the midst, as a matter of fact, tomorrow morning, I'll be giving part 2 of a 3-part program we have on Chagall's biblical images, which are predominantly engravings. But for part 3, we also bring in some of the paintings that he did related to the Bible. And we have a 2-part program on the Jerusalem windows, 6 in each part. So all of our Chagall programs are extremely popular, and I am in the midst of giving this series on the biblical images at several places where I present. The majority of our programs are given at senior living communities. Myrna was very savvy when she started the organization and decided to target that market. Her mother was actually living in a community in Bethesda at the time. And back in those days, there wasn't a whole lot of programming going on in the community where her mom lived. And so, as Myrna likes to say, she wanted to engage the residents, especially her mother, with things other than bingo and ball toss. So she really decided to target that market. So we predominantly present at senior living communities. I was at one earlier today, and I'll be at 2 different ones tomorrow, including Ringhouse tomorrow afternoon, which is a regular client.
Carol Ann.
Questions, but I did want to share this painting that a friend, a very dear special friend, gave me when he came back from Israel. Can you see it? Yeah, and I looked at the back, and it said it was 1917 that around that time that he did it. So now I'm thinking this might have been Bella, and I
bet it probably was.
Yeah,
Bella was a favorite subject of the artist. She was a readily available model. She didn't cost anything. Both Bella and Ida were frequent models in his paintings.
I was wondering, it seems like he's so prolific. Is he unusually prolific compared to other artists? I mean, it seems like he's done so much work over, and of course he lived a very long time. And the last question I have is, did he live in Israel for any period, for any length of period?
He was quite a prolific artist. He was an artist with an obsession, I would say, constantly producing work. He did spend time traveling in Israel, especially in the early 1930s. And actually many of these engravings from his biblical images for a Bible he was creating, an illustrated Bible, were inspired by his trip to Israel. He also went to other places in the Middle East, like Egypt. He predominantly lived in France. So from 1887, when he was born, to 1907, he was in Vitebsk. And then from 1907 to 1910 in St. Petersburg. Then he moved to Paris at the age of 24 and spent 4 years there. Went back to Russia until 1922. And then he was back in France until 1941, when he came to the United States during World War II. And then in 1945, after the war concluded, he went back to France, and he actually settled in Nice. And there is a Musée Chagall in Nice that is devoted to his work. And it is where all of the engravings, the original engravings for his Bible, are housed.
Wow, thank you.
Sure.
I'm curious how many of us have been to the Shul Hadassah to see the stained glass windows, which Jay is there right now. It must be.
He also did stained glass for a number of other religious institutions, including some cathedrals. When my mother-in-law passed away, we brought a lot of her things from her house to our house, and I found a whole set of postcards that she had gotten from some Chagall windows in France that were from a cathedral. And I have those stuck up on my on the hutch over my that is on my desk. He also made mosaics and textile pieces. And I would definitely encourage you all to go down to the sculpture garden at the National Gallery. One of his mosaics, which he gave to the Neff family of Washington, who were great art collectors, was given to the National Gallery several years ago and is in the sculpture garden.
I just want to take a moment to welcome Esther, joined us since we began, and also Susan Millman. I don't know that we've met yet. I'm Rabbi Mark. Welcome, Susan. Any other questions? If not, I have something that I'd like to add. Okay, if you have another question, we have about 10 minutes left. Let's remember. Yeah, Susan, go ahead. Where are you and how did you find out about us?
A friend told me. Mel told me.
Oh, good. Any friend of Mel's?
It was a wonderful presentation, but it concentrated really on his early years.
That is correct.
And you did that intentionally just to be able to cover that well. I mean, he had such a wide range of medium as well as the number of years that he produced.
Mhm.
But I was wondering whether you were planning to do anything with his later years.
Right. So this program in particular is based on his autobiography, which he wrote prior to World War II, and illustrated as well with engravings. As I mentioned, we do have additional. We could do Chagall programs in infinitum, I think, because of his long career. But we do have our series on Chagall's biblical images, which is a 3-part series, as well as a 2-part series on the Jerusalem windows.
Do you have any of your series online?
We are working on that. We just redid our website earlier this year. And as part of the what Myrna likes to call our phase 2 project, we are working on getting many of our programs recorded with the images with voiceover. We should be premiering the first of those soon, and it will be available for a modest sum from our website for download. And the first one we started with is our introductory program called Art Through the Prism of a Culture. And it's sort of a Jewish art history 101 that starts with the ancient world and goes through the modern world. We do have plans to do at least about 12 of those or so, between 10 and 12. It's a bit slower process than we anticipated. We are working with a video studio here in the DC area, and they are doing the voiceover for us. And the one sticking point for us seems to be finding appropriate music in the back to put in the background. So our folks who are working on this are trying to get that first one up. But we'll keep you all posted. And I know Mark is on our mailing list now. And thank you for opening our most recent newsletter, which just went out the other day. And we will continue to keep everybody informed through the website, our social media, and through our newsletter, our e-newsletter, as to the progress on that project.
So Susan, this is why you need to be on our mailing list, because this is what was advertised, the Art of Marc Chagall, the early years.
Oh, okay.
That's okay.
Yeah.
So that's your question.
If I had seen that, I would have known.
Mel, got to do a good job.
No worries.
So I wanted to, anybody else? I wanted to take a moment just to remind us who we are, Minyan Oneg Shabbat, that as a MOSh-niks, as an ordinary of Reb Zalman Schachter Shalomi of blessed memory, whose life and whose work was in the Hasidic tradition, right? So Chagall's work is coming out of that same place. And Chagall understands the world and understands his art in the same way that Reb Zalman understands our invitation into Torah through the psycho-spiritual realm, right? And with that, I want to share with you a quote that I shared with people this afternoon in the meditation session. And here it is, which for me, it connects what we experience in a Jewish renewal setting and how Chagall saw his work coming from being informed by his Hasidic tradition. Here's the quote. Chagall said, "I am against the terms fantasy and symbolism in themselves. I'm against the terms fantasy and symbolism in themselves. All our interior world is reality, perhaps more so than our apparent world. To call everything that appears illogical, fantasy, fairy tale, or chimera would be practically to admit not understanding nature." And if that doesn't describe what our yearning at MOSh is as Neo-Hasidic, in the Neo-Hasidic tradition, and this being our lineage and seeing ourselves in Chagall's paintings too, and just the wonderful flights of fantasy that just came natural to him because this is the way he saw the world. And he's not seeing the world with that is, he's not seeing the four worlds separate. You get that what I'm saying? He's not seeing Asiya separate from Yetzirah, separate from Bria, separate from Atzilut, right? He's seeing it all interwoven, in an intra-dialogue with each other, so that when he, in a figure, I made a note of the woman and the dead man, which seems to be the very first painting that you, well, anyway, that you shared, Nancy, of the fiddler on the roof.
Right?
I couldn't help notice that the woman was as big as the house.
Yes.
Right? And so he's not seeing things quote realistically, but he's saying too that I'm not seeing things in a symbolic way. This is for me how it's hitting me in that kishkis. And I'm going to do my best to interpret that and to articulate it using the forms that are at my disposal. And they change, just like our articulation of Jewish, ritual is changing from day to day, and how we try to borrow from other traditions in order to deepen our relationship with divinity. So I just wanted to add that, Nancy, as a underscoring. It's the almost indescribable. I want to admit that I both appreciated so much your presentation, but I had to really hold off from my impulse to want it over intellectualized, or for you to tell me what I'm seeing, right? And I know that is your job, is to hint at that, to give me entree for people who are not seeing his painting, who doesn't have the same kind of what should I say, sensitivity or maybe relationship with art as I and many others do. So I both appreciate your presentation, and I wanted to add the other part, complement it with what I just offered, and I hope that resonates with everybody here.
Thank you. That was a great way to describe it and to sort of wrap things up.
Amen. So again, thank you so much, Nancy. I'm wondering, does anyone have a need to say Kaddish? Is anyone in mourning, or is anyone observing a yard site today? Okay. If not, again, thank you, Nancy.
Oh, you're welcome. I just wanted to say, I was just reading the chat. Someone asked about a program on Ben Sean. Not yet, but maybe in the works soon.
Terrific.
We as a group have discussed the idea of doing a program on Sean, and we just haven't quite gotten to a specific program on him, although he is included in several of our other programs.
Thank you so much. And Meira, welcome. Let me not leave out welcoming you here. And we have a traditional way of ending every session, Nancy. We end it with this.